Apple has a long habit of removing things people love, waiting for the complaints to peak, then quietly bringing them back and pretending nothing happened. This is all of them. The headphone jack. The 3.5mm headphone jack had been on every iPhone since the original in 2007. 9 years. Every iPhone, every pair of headphones made in the previous century worked with it. In September 2016, Apple removed it from the iPhone 7. The company's vice president of marketing, Phil Schiller, used the word courage to describe the decision on stage. The word has not aged well. Every major phone manufacturer, Samsung, Google, LG, Sony, ran advertising campaigns mocking the decision. Samsung's campaign was the most direct. An ad showed people hunting desperately for an adapter before their flight, then cutting to a Samsung user just plugging in their headphones. Then Samsung removed the headphone jack from the Galaxy S20 in 2020. Google removed it from the Pixel 2 in 2017. LG removed it in 2016. Every manufacturer that mocked Apple publicly removed their own headphone jack within 3 years. The feature Apple was ridiculed for became the industry standard. What Apple understood, and the market eventually accepted, was that the headphone jack was holding back phone design. That doesn't make the execution any less arrogant, or the word courage any less ridiculous. 3D Touch. Apple introduced 3D Touch with the iPhone 6s in 2015. It was a pressure-sensitive layer built into the screen that could detect not just where you touched, but how hard. A light press opened a preview of a link without loading it. A firm press opened a full contextual menu. On the keyboard, pressing anywhere turned the whole keyboard into a trackpad for precise cursor control. It was a genuinely different interaction model, something the iPhone had that no other phone offered. Apple removed it starting with the iPhone XR in 2018. The hardware was expensive and took up space inside the device, and OLED screens made the pressure-sensitive layer difficult to include. By the iPhone 11 in 2019, 3D Touch was gone from every iPhone in the lineup. Apple replaced it with Haptic Touch, a long press combined with vibration feedback. Haptic Touch does approximately the same things as 3D Touch. It just takes longer, requires you to hold instead of press, and removes the nuance of multiple pressure levels. Apple's own announcement didn't mention that 3D Touch had been removed. The spec sheet changed. The feature page disappeared. Most users never knew it was gone. The ones who did miss it still do. The physical home button. The home button appeared on the first iPhone in 2007. For 10 consecutive years, it was the single most recognizable physical interface element in consumer technology. You pressed it to go home. You double tapped it to see open apps. You held it to activate Siri. You pressed it to wake the screen. One button, 10 years of muscle memory built across hundreds of millions of people. In November 2017, the iPhone X removed it. The gestures that replaced it were genuinely well designed. Swipe up to go home. Swipe up and pause for the app switcher. Press the side button for Siri. The problem was the decade of habit that preceded them. For months after the iPhone X launched, longtime iPhone users were visually scanning the bottom of the screen, looking for a button that wasn't there. Swiping from the bottom to go home felt counterintuitive when every instinct said to press something. The Touch ID fingerprint sensor inside the home button was also gone, replaced with Face ID, which stopped working the moment you put on a mask, which became relevant in ways nobody predicted 2 years later. The button didn't come back. It returned in a different form in the iPhone SE line for users who wanted it. A sensor, not a mechanical button, but functionally identical. The muscle memory took longer to rebuild than Apple planned for. AirPower. In September 2017, Apple announced AirPower, a wireless charging mat that could charge an iPhone, Apple Watch, and AirPods simultaneously, anywhere on the surface. No precise placement required. It was shown on stage. It was printed on product packaging. Retailers were briefed on it. Accessories makers designed cases compatible with it. Then nothing shipped. Months passed. No update, no timeline, no explanation. In March 2019, Apple published a single paragraph. The mat had not met their high standards for hardware. It was canceled. The reason, later reported, the overlapping coils required to charge multiple devices across an unspecified surface generated heat that Apple's engineers could not safely or reliably manage within the thickness they needed. The physics didn't cooperate. Apple had announced a product they could not yet build. No other Apple product in recent memory has been officially announced with product packaging, then officially canceled with a paragraph, and no alternative. AirPower was replaced with nothing. The MagSafe charging system Apple eventually developed was better in most ways, but it required you to place your phone in a specific spot on a specific charger, which was the opposite of what AirPower had promised. iTunes launched January 9th, 2001. It was the app that put 1,000 songs in your pocket, or more precisely, the app that put them in your computer so they could reach your pocket. It sold the first legal digital music download at 99 cents per song when the CD industry was at its peak. It killed the CD industry. It launched the App Store in 2008. It managed every iPhone ever made for 11 years. In 2019, Apple replaced it with 3 separate applications: music, TV, and podcasts. The logic was sound. iTunes had become bloated, doing too many things within one interface never designed to do them all. The execution left gaps. The 3 replacement apps together do not cover everything iTunes did alone. Music doesn't manage device backups. TV doesn't manage app transfers. Podcast doesn't sync music. For people with large music libraries of non-purchased files, the transition was a headache. And on Windows, where tens of millions of iPhone users still sync, iTunes remains the only option. In 2025, iTunes on Windows is still required to restore an iPhone. Apple seems to have forgotten Windows exists. iPhoto and Aperture. For years, Apple offered 2 photo management and editing applications. iPhoto was the consumer version, straightforward, capable, good for most people. Aperture was for professionals, a serious tool with advanced color grading, non-destructive editing, and a library system that photographers built entire workflows around. Thousands of professional photographers organized years of their work inside Aperture. On June 27th, 2014, Apple announced both were being discontinued. They would be replaced by a new application called Photos. Arriving with OS X 10.10 Yosemite in 2015, photographers had approximately 6 months to migrate. Photos launched and was immediately considered a significant downgrade from Aperture by professional users. Basic editing features that Aperture had handled for years were absent or simplified. The professional photography community spent years after the transition telling each other which third-party apps to use instead: Lightroom, Capture One, Darkroom. Apple eventually improved Photos substantially, but the professionals who had built their workflows around Aperture had already rebuilt them elsewhere and had no reason to return. 6 months' notice to migrate years of carefully organized work into a replacement application that professionals considered inadequate was not enough. It has never been enough. MagSafe Laptop Connector. MagSafe launched on MacBooks in 2006. It was a magnetic power connector. Plug it in and magnets snapped it into place. Pull the cable, trip over it, or close the laptop lid on it. The connector released cleanly with no damage to the port, the cable, or the laptop. It saved MacBooks from falling off tables more times than anyone has measured. In 2016, Apple released a new MacBook Pro that charged over USB-C. MagSafe was gone. Apple's position: USB-C was universal. You could charge from any port. You could use any compatible cable. This was better. The counter-argument: the one thing USB-C cannot do is detach cleanly when someone walks across the cable in your kitchen. Laptops fell, ports bent, cables strained. In October 2021, Apple released the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro with Apple Silicon. MagSafe was back. The USB-C charging ports were still there. The decision to bring MagSafe back while keeping USB-C was an acknowledgement, in product form, that removing MagSafe had been a mistake. Apple said nothing publicly to that effect. They presented it as an upgrade. It was a correction. Airport routers. Apple launched its Airport line of wireless routers in July 1999, with Steve Jobs famously demonstrating wireless internet by passing an iBook through a hula hoop on stage to prove no cable was attached. The Airport routers integrated seamlessly with every Apple device and made setting up a home network significantly simpler than any competing product. Time capsule models included a hard drive that backed up your Mac automatically over Wi-Fi through Time Machine. For households entirely on Apple devices, Airport routers required almost no configuration. In 2016, Apple quietly disbanded the team that built them. In April 2018, Apple officially discontinued the entire Airport line. After 19 years of the product category, Apple released a single statement to 9 to 5 Mac. The routers were discontinued. No replacement. No partnership announced. No alternative recommended. Users were told to buy someone else's router. Apple later began selling third-party routers in its stores, including the Eero brand. Amazon acquired Eero in 2019. So Apple discontinued its own routers, sent users to competitors, and the recommended alternative now belongs to Amazon. The Touch Bar. In October 2016, Apple replaced the function keys on the MacBook Pro with a touchscreen strip across the top of the keyboard. It changed dynamically based on what app was open, showing controls relevant to the current task. In theory, adaptive controls that changed per application were more useful than static function keys. In practice, the people most likely to buy a MacBook Pro, developers, video editors, musicians, writers who had spent years building keyboard shortcuts, found the Touch Bar consistently slower than the physical keys it replaced. Physical keys can be pressed without looking. The Touch Bar required a glance, then a look, then a touch. The Escape key, which developers press hundreds of times per day, was moved onto the Touch Bar where it had no tactile edge to find. The backlash from professional users was immediate and persistent. It didn't stop. In 2021, Apple launched the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Pro and M1 Max chips. Physical function keys returned. The Escape key was back in its original position. The Touch Bar was gone from every professional MacBook Apple sold. At the launch event, Apple said that users wanted the familiar tactile feel of mechanical keys that pro users love. It was the closest Apple has ever come to admitting a product was a mistake without using that word. Google Maps as iPhone default. Google Maps was on the original iPhone at launch in 2007. For 5 years, it was the default navigation application on every iPhone, a partnership that gave Apple a finished, accurate, deeply indexed mapping product that had taken Google years to build. In September 2012, Apple replaced it with Apple Maps. Apple Maps launched with wrong directions, non-existent roads, businesses placed miles from their actual locations, and satellite imagery so distorted that bridges appeared to be melting. In Australia, the app directed drivers into a national park with no accessible road. Police issued a formal public safety warning advising people not to use Apple Maps for navigation. In Alaska, Apple Maps directed drivers onto a taxiway at Fairbanks International Airport. Tim Cook issued a public letter of apology telling iPhone users to use competitor products while Apple fixed its own. Google Maps returned to the App Store 3 months later and broke download records on its first day back. Apple spent approximately 10 years making Maps competitive. The app is genuinely good now. The lesson Apple relearned was not a new one. Shipping something before it works, at scale, to hundreds of millions of people, produces consequences that take years to undo. The SD card slot. In 2016, Apple removed the SD card slot from the MacBook Pro when it pursued a thinner design with USB-C across all ports. Photographers and video editors, the exact users most likely to buy a MacBook Pro, immediately objected. An SD card slot lets you pull a card from a camera and transfer files directly. Without it, you need an adapter. Apple sold the adapter. In October 2021, the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro with Apple Silicon brought the SD card slot back. Apple's product page described its return as a feature. It was a reinstatement. The SD card slot had been removed for a design reason: thinness. It was returned when Apple prioritized professional utility over thinness. Both decisions were Apple's choice. Only one of them required an apology. Neither received one. iMessage on Android. In 2013, Apple's executives held internal conversations about whether to bring iMessage to Android. Eddie Q, who ran Apple's internet services, later testified that Apple could technically have built a version of iMessage that worked across iOS and Android seamlessly. They chose not to. Craig Federighi, Apple's software engineering head, wrote in an internal email in 2013, iMessage on Android would simply serve to remove an obstacle to iPhone families giving their kids Android phones. In 2016, when a former Apple employee observed that iMessage was the #1 most difficult reason to leave the Apple universe and amounts to serious lock-in, Phil Schiller responded, "Moving iMessage to Android will hurt us more than help us." Both emails were disclosed during the Epic Games versus Apple trial in 2021. This is not a feature Apple canceled. It is a feature Apple decided never to build, specifically because keeping it iPhone exclusive made iPhones harder to leave. Green bubbles in iMessage for Android users are not a technical limitation. They are a deliberate product decision documented in internal emails. The lock-in strategy worked. 10 years of Android users being treated as second class in group chats was a business decision dressed as a platform limitation. For everything Apple took from Android while keeping iMessage exclusive, every iPhone feature Apple copied from Android is on screen right now.